Hello and welcome to the Libertarian Perspective, a discussion of state, local, and national issues with a libertarian flair. My name is Doug Klippel. I'm the former two-time state chairman of the Libertarian Party of Florida. We appreciate you tuning into today's broadcast. Got a couple of special guests for you today. First of all, maybe a somewhat familiar face. People that have tuned into this broadcast or maybe the Concerned Taxpayers broadcast before will recognize the smiling face of Joe Andrews here. Joe with the Concerned Taxpayers, true commission participant here in Jacksonville as well. And we appreciate you taking some time out to be on the show today.
Yes, indeed. Very, very glad to be here.
All right. And a new smiling face for us, we're pleased to have, who's actually the new regional representative for the Libertarian Party of Florida for Northeast Florida here. Richard Nader. Richard, so glad that you could join us on today's broadcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. And Richard, you'll certainly find out that when we have our tapings of the Libertarian Perspective, because of the mischief of politicians at all levels, the federal, the state, and the local levels, we're never at a shortage of material in terms of things to talk about here on the Libertarian Perspective.
There's always something.
There is always something. So since you're a new smiling face here on the broadcast and new to this role as regional director, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and how you found the libertarian movement?
Well, I work in the computer science field, and so that kind of, leads me in the direction of individual liberty. But heard Harry Brown in 1999. He came to Jacksonville, and I sat in the audience and listened to him in person. Actually got to speak to him for a few moments afterwards, and since then, the whole concept that he presented and the whole idea of a government based on the Constitution and on individual liberty has just been a draw for me, and I've been working at one level or another, grassroots and local party, and now with the state party, working towards that goal.
Fantastic. Well, we're so glad that you could make it, and congratulations on your election to the regional representative role. We look forward to seeing more of you on this broadcast, and look forward to seeing more of you out and about in the community talking about the libertarian message. That's wonderful.
I hope both come true.
And Joe, I know that you, economist in terms of your background, and certainly that philosophy, I'm sure, pervades a lot of your interest in the freedom movement, whether it's through Concerned Taxpayers or the Republican Liberty Caucus or whatever groups you've been affiliated with over the years. I'm sure that your grounding in economics and free market principles have played an essential role in that.
That's very true. And each of the organizations that I belong to are focused on those principles, yes.
Yeah.
Especially the Concerned Taxpayers of Duval County. We are very active political activists, and have a number of things going on currently.
Absolutely, and we've got a lot of which we're going to end up talking about today. So since we do have a full agenda, let's go ahead and put our first overhead up around what today's show's topics are going to be. And we are, since it's just so much in the news right now, we are going to take just a few minutes to talk about the federal debt ceiling. We've got a showdown going on. We got in the blue corner, we got the Republicans. In the red corner, we have the Republicans, and it sounds like we've got a steel cage match getting ready to come up with this federal debt ceiling talk. We are going to again welcome Mayor Alvin Brown and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that our incoming mayor faces. Obviously, primary among those are what we are calling Jacksonville's budget woes. We're going to get a little bit into the pension and some of the issues that are around those things. And then finally, our last topic will be the Jacksonville Economic Development Commission and this newly formed Downtown Community Empowerment Corporation, a private-public partnership that has been proposed by Mayor Brown. We'll talk a little bit about that and whether as taxpayers we need to be holding on to our wallets and keeping them closed with dear life. So as always, a very full docket to talk about. Let's go ahead and roll right into our next overhead then around the federal debt ceiling. And just very, very quickly, the deadline that is keep being mentioned in the news is August 2nd in terms of when ostensibly the federal government could be in default and not able to meet its obligations. On one side, again, ostensibly we have Republicans talking about program cuts. The Democrats want increased revenue, including those private jet owners that they don't want to have any kind of a tax break in terms of their private jets. Of course, anytime any level of government talks about being cut, here at the local level, if there's any cut in funding, it's immediately closing a school or a fire station or something like that. And a similar hue and cry here. The initial reaction is that Social Security checks and other forms of assistance won't be able to be mailed out. Obviously, a lot of posturing on both sides. And I guess my question for both of you, what is the expected outcome? I mean, Joe, isn't it interesting that we were talking before the show that supposedly there is this trust fund of Social Security. The government gets over $200 million every month. I mean, in terms of revenue. So, why the hue and cry? Why is the Social Security the first thing that's run up the flagpole?
Well, to quote the president from yesterday, I believe it was, he said, "I can't guarantee that the checks will go out on August 3rd. Well, I wonder why, because the money has been paid to provide those checks. What's he going to do with it? Is he going to step up and say, I'm commandeering those funds? I don't think so."
And Richard, isn't it always interesting, anytime anybody talks about cutting any kind of government program, the immediate hue and cry is around something that's just a sacred cow that nobody could imagine doing without.
Absolutely. It diverts attention from the little fish in the creek that we have to spend $50 million to protect, or a research grant into the sex lives of crickets, or all the other vital government functions that they perform out of Washington, D.C. these days.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, Joe, would a good analogy around this debt ceiling be, say, maybe a household that was maxing out on its credit cards, that didn't have any more room in terms of spending, and instead of looking at trying to reduce expenditures and get their handle on expenditures, they're instead phoning Visa or MasterCard and begging for a increase in their credit? Would that be a reasonable analogy?
If you chose the family carefully so that they have an addiction to spending, that's the problem with our government at all levels, federal, state, and local. They are addicted, absolutely addicted to spending. Speaking for local government, I can't think of a project that they will not spend money on. I can give you lots of examples, but you would need a longer show.
Well, I guess that we'll just need to have you back. Well, certainly as libertarians, Richard, we understand this concept of government. We have concentrated benefits but diffused costs, right? So programs or initiatives that might cost you or I 10, 15, 20, even 100, 500, even $1,000 a year. Are we actually going to jump on a plane and fly to Washington, D.C.? Are we going to drive to Tallahassee? I mean, do we have the time, the energy to do that? What is the trade-off? And the elected officials always hear from the people that stand to benefit from those specific programs.
Absolutely, and even being on this show and talking about them down the street from my office is about all we can do to reach out and say, actually, no. The amazing thing is that they talk about revenues, we need more revenues. There are things that government does, that government can do to generate revenue without taxing anybody. And they don't have to spend any money to do it. All they have to do is step back and allow the mining of coal, that they collect revenues. Government collects revenues on coal mining in federal lands. Government collects revenue on logging in federal lands. Oil, all offshore oil, all pays a hefty fee to the government for the mining of for the drilling for that oil. Without the government spending a dime, the government does not pay for oil wells. They simply collect when the oil comes out of the ground. Government could generate revenue without taxing business if they simply allowed business to do business.
Well, certainly, there's certainly a long trend of thought that, spurring the economy, government getting out of the way and allowing the economy to prosper is the best way of increasing overall revenues to government and making sure that there aren't budget shortfalls. There's no doubt about that. Well, clearly, we will be addressing this issue again, maybe next month or whatever after some of this dust is settled. It will be very interesting to chat about it and see what the status of things is. But just because it was so much in the news, I thought it was worthy of at least a few minutes of our conversation. Well, let's switch gears and come back to the local level here. And we'll go ahead and put up our next overhead, which does talk about Mayor Alvin Brown. And, this is a great success story. First African-American mayor here in Jacksonville. I think we can all reflect on that progress and feel good about that progress. A Democrat who, at least in words, says that he's fiscally conservative. I've heard him say in many forms he doesn't see government as the solution. He doesn't see big government spending as the solution to problems. So certainly wonderful to see that. Now, you might not necessarily expect that to be coming out of his mouth, given some of the past associates that he's had in the political sphere, hanging out with Al Gore and Bill Clinton. I'm not exactly, I know Clinton said the era of big government is over, but we know how much we can believe the words that came out of the ex-president's mouth. He was on a community empowerment board that was by them, and he was also a director of a Katrina fund that was established by former Presidents Bush and Clinton. Let's go ahead and look at the next overhead real quick, because this recently came out in terms of the supporters of Alvin Brown. And Gentlemen, I don't know how much you read about this in the paper, but obviously the National Democratic Party, swung into gear. The Democratic Party of Florida, obviously swung into gear. He had some very interesting endorsements to the Weavers, the owners of the Jags. They got a split decision. On one side you had Wayne Weaver, the owner of the Jags, supporting Mike Hogan. His wife supported Alvin Brown. So I don't know if they were just trying to hedge their bets and make sure that no matter who won, they were in good somewhat. But I thought it was very interesting, this group that was formed, a PAC, Conservatives for a Better Jacksonville. Raised some $426,000 that they contributed to the Florida Democratic Party, which in turn donated that to Brown's campaign. Biggest contributor, Peter Rummel, the former CEO of the St. Joe Company, $150,000. They really brought a mechanism in. They swung into gear, 500 temporary election workers. A big kind of political machine effort here to work on behalf of then candidate Alvin Brown. Joe, were you surprised to see this kind of machinery kick into gear for this election?
Not particularly, because I met Alvin early in the campaign process. As you know, at the time I was campaigning for council, so I was in all of the venues, and Alvin is was a very attractive candidate. It's not surprising that some people would cross the line and support him. So I don't find that as a surprise. I supported the other candidate, but we have Mr. Brown as mayor. We have to work with him and see if we can make some progress in the city.
Yeah. Richard, did it seem interesting to you at all that perhaps some of the people that might benefit from some downtown development dollars or economic incentive kind of things, which candidate Mike Hogan was specifically on record as being against, that maybe they crossed over? Was that a surprise to you?
Well, I'll tell you, as a Libertarian Party member, I did not have a dog in that particular race. But that being said, the surprise to me in that election wasn't so much that Brown was able to generate a machine to get him elected, was that Hogan, who should have been able to generate a giant machine to get elected, just didn't. It is almost like he won the first election. He won the general election with everybody. Came in first place, didn't get enough, and just assumed he was going to coast through, that all the other candidates are all going to throw their support behind him. And that didn't happen. And that's the part of this that was a surprise to me, was that the Hogan campaign just kind of folded up. And so from a political perspective, I don't understand that. I don't know why that happened.
Yeah, I've joked with people that I'm not sure whatever political consultancy the Hogan campaign used, I'm not sure if the future is very bright for that particular group of political consultants. I'm not sure who was advising that campaign. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say they felt like the Hogan campaign snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. But it was a very interesting race to watch, and I thought it was very interesting to see the ascendancy of Alvin Brown and just the momentum that he seemed to pick up in those last couple of days going into the election. Obviously, for people to claim that it's not important to vote, that election really, I think, speaks to the fact that you probably do need to get out and vote, because obviously it's a very, very, very close race. And I'm cautiously optimistic about Mayor Brown's administration. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding, but I've at least generally liked what I've heard from him early on. So we'll go ahead and see.
I think he's a very bright man, and I think he is trying to approach the job honestly. And as I said, we need to work with him. He's our mayor.
Absolutely right.
For 4 years.
And we do need to work with him because obviously here in Jacksonville we are facing some budgetary shortfalls, what we call some budgetary woes, and we've got an overhead that we're going to go ahead and put up that detail just some of those, just from the pension perspective. And again, we actually presented some of these on our last broadcast. Some of these figures, frankly, are kind of jaw-dropping. Unfunded liabilities, $1.7 billion. That is a B, folks. You're not seeing a typo up there. That is a B, as in boy or billion. Mayor Payton actually proposed some planned savings of $700 million with some fairly, moderate concessions. In police and fire employees have to work 25 years, not 20. Their contribution rate goes up a little bit. Their pension calculation is based on a longer period of time, 5 years, not 2. Some cost of living changes being, the actual changes being spread out to 2 years, not every 3 months. So, maybe some minor things. Joe, I don't know how close you are to some of these figures. I mean, is that enough to save us as taxpayers, those changes?
Well, the unfunded liability of $1.7 billion is all of the, it's a combination of all of the pension funds. There are three, I believe, the police and fire, the corrections officers, and the general employees. That is the total unfunded actuarial liability for all of them. And of course, that liability is calculated over a 30-year period. Some of that, I think, has already been ameliorated a little bit with the return to a sense of normalcy in the stock market, because the funds are all invested in market resources of one nature or another. So some of that has been re-earned or earned back. But it is still a very serious problem. It's a problem that is crying for some complete overhaul, some redesign of the funds themselves, and they cannot be sustained as they are currently, with frequent increases in benefits and you know, a tax base that may be shrinking, especially during recessionary times. So those are part of the reasons for those large numbers of unfunded. But in my opinion, we do have to overhaul the system. Now, the recent announcement about the negotiations that the $700 million represented, that while that is technically true, those numbers don't come in right away. Most of the $700 million is on the far end of the spectrum, and when you do a net present value of that $700 million, it's currently worth about $115 million. Wow. So it's not nearly as big as the press announcement made it look like. So there are some other things. I'm absolutely convinced that the pension funds need to be changed to defined contribution instead of defined benefit.
Yes.
The defined benefit puts all of the responsibility on the taxpayer. The defined contribution puts the responsibility on the pension owner itself.
Right, understood. And of course, I mean, certainly that's a transition that we've seen in the private sector very much, you know, over the last kind of years, and certainly just, you know, demographics, I think, speak to the need for that, for those kind of changes.
Absolutely, because business has long since come to the conclusion that it can't work. So they rightly have made the move.
Right.
The government is lagging.
Right. And I'm going to get some more of your thoughts on that in just a second. But, you know, Richard, kind of, you know, dovetailing on that, we know that across the country, I mean, this is not just something here in Jackson, we know that across the country, you know, the last 5 or 6 years, really the only area of the economy, if you will, that's shown sustained growth has been an increase in government employment. We see city and state governments across the country, all the way from Florida, probably the biggest poster children for this are out in California, where public service worker unions and the benefits that they've accrued, and things like being able to work 20 years and retiring at a very large percentage of your last couple of years of salary, and these tremendous benefits. You know, how do we get on that kind of path, and what do we need to do to get out in front of that?
Well, I tell you that the numbers are just astounding. 1.7 billion, that's just the Jacksonville. That is $1,700 for every man, woman, and child in the city. I mean, $1,700 per person. It's just amazing. I don't think that the public pensions problem across the country is sustainable. I don't think it's reparable. I really think that we're going to start to see these municipalities collapse. We're going to start to see these, or financially collapse. We're going to start to see states financially collapse. We're going to start to see corporate bankruptcy at a government level. And every entity that fails is going to pass up the problem to the next level up. When Jacksonville collapses under the weight of this unfunded liability, that liability is going to get passed up to Tallahassee. When Tallahassee collapses under weight of Tampa and Miami and Orlando and Jacksonville and the rest of the state, you know, having the same problem, then they're going to try to pass that up to Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. will soak it and soak it up until it's so huge that that unfunded liability affects every person, and we become Greece. And when the giant falls hard, and when the United States governmental economy collapses, then well, those hillbillies out in the woods that shoot their own food and we all make fun of are going to be the best people in town to know. And short of, I don't think $700 million adjustment is going to solve the problem. Yeah. Doesn't cover half. Yeah. I don't think that increasing the debt limit is going to solve the problem. I think it's going to make it worse. Yeah. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that it's going to be a rough row for my son to hoe, and he's 7.
Yeah. Well, Joe, obviously with your background in economics, I think it was, Bastiat that said that government is the great fiction by which everybody tries to live at the expense of everybody else.
Right.
And, it's amazing to me how otherwise learned and sophisticated people, including a lot of politicians, will look at something like this problem that we're talking about here with these unfunded liabilities, public sector unions, and perhaps maybe the greatest example of a program that's just not sustainable, of course, is Social Security, which I've often referred to as the ultimate Ponzi scheme. But they'll look you square in the eye and say, oh, that's going to be solved for another 20, 30 years. We don't have anything to worry about. I mean, what's your reaction to somebody that actually has kind of either naivete or the audacity or just the wrong-mindedness to actually even say something like that?
Well, obviously, one of the things that is not necessarily evident, but it's a fact, is that particular politician won't be around to accept the blame. He will either have retired or been replaced by someone else. And that's one of the serious faults, I think, with our system, is that the politicians are not ever held responsible for what they do or for what they say. That's why rhetoric is the language of the politician. He doesn't have to prove anything he says, doesn't have to be responsible for it. Same thing for all of the programs they institute. They're not responsible. They just move on.
Yeah. Yeah, well put, well put. Well, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit more about some of the city's financial woes and some of the ways that our city may be able to get our handle on some of the finances just a second. But before we do that, I want to let the folks out there who are viewing the show know how they can learn a little bit more about what's going on with the Libertarian Party here locally, how they can get in touch with us. Maybe you're listening to this dialogue and you're saying, oh, those guys sound kind of interesting. Maybe I'd like to learn a little bit more about libertarian philosophy, a little bit more about what the Libertarian Party stands for. So one of the things that you can do, of course, is do what you're doing right now, which is continue to tune in to the Libertarian Perspective TV broadcast. We air on the Comcast Community Access Channel Wednesdays at 7 o'clock, and at other times we are repeated. So when you're channel surfing and you come across the Libertarian Perspective, you can always stop and tune in and find out what we're discussing. The second thing is visit the National Libertarian Party website. A great resource there in terms of things that are going on not only in Florida but all 50 states. And that website is www.lp.org. And then locally, you can check us out by going to our local website, which is being repeated as a crawler during the broadcast, which is www.jaxlp.org. You can also give us a ring here locally at 904-731-5656. There are also local meetings happening here in Duval and in surrounding counties. And Richard, is the recently elected regional rep, why don't you go ahead and tell the folks about what they can do to get involved locally?
Well, our local Jacksonville affiliate meets on Southside Boulevard at the Golden Corral on Thursday, the 14th.
I think it's
21st.
21st.
Sorry, it's doing the math in my head.
Yep.
The 21st of this month. And we meet on the third Thursday of each month. We also have affiliates in Baker County and out in St. Johns County. They meet at various times and at the website at jaxlp.com. And you can find a calendar with all of our events and meetings updated constantly.
Fantastic. We appreciate that. And Joe, obviously you're very involved with the Concerned Taxpayers group. Why don't you tell us about your meeting dates? I believe they're on is it the first or second Monday?
Second Monday.
Second Monday.
Alternating on even months, we meet at the Piccadilly Restaurant at Regency Square. And on the odd-numbered months, like July, we met at the Piccadilly on Lane and Ramona Avenue.
Right. So, and not that we're casting aspersions on anybody on the west side, but the easy way to remember that is that the west side is the odd side. I mean, that's the way that I remember that. So,
even months, east side.
See, he's a candidate for office. You see how he's playing it very even here. So, well, Believe it or not, we're actually getting down to the last 5 minutes of the show. It's amazing how time flies when we're having fun. So I'm going to put the one last overhead we have around the JEDC, and then we'll transition that back into our local discussion of local issues and the local budget. So our last slide does deal with the JEDC, the Jacksonville Economic Development Commission, and this newly formed Downtown Community Empowerment Corporation, public-private partnership that the mayor, the newly elected mayor, Alvin Brown, has just kicked off. What I thought was interesting about this, I mean, I guess many things interesting, but according to newspaper reports, the current JEDC director, Ron Barton, and 4 of his other top administrators are threatening to take their toys and go home. I think that there's a little bit of a turf battle here, wondering how the JEDC and their downtown development efforts overlap with this new creation from Alvin Brown. Unfortunately, in the midst of all the turmoil figuring out what's going on, it hasn't stopped the JEDC from stroking some checks. They recently did this $2.75 million to Everbank for them to move some jobs downtown, and they're contemplating this $2.5 million for Medtronic Zomed for 175 jobs. Joe, your take on the whole notion of economic development through something like the JEDC, is that a good idea for government to be involved in those kinds of things?
I do not believe so. I took a course called Location Theory in economics, and a business will locate where its cost to deliver a product to market is minimized. I think when a city government or an agency gives money to a company to relocate according to the city or the government's wishes, it is introducing a disruption in the corporate decision-making process, which may eventually cause the company not to be able to make the profit it expects, and then it will make adjustments. It will move. So obviously there are clawback provisions in all of these deals that the JEDC makes, but I think it's just a total disruption of market factors that should not be practiced by government.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't disagree with your assessment. I mean, Richard, is that the proper role of government, be deciding winners and losers and who should get some largesse? I mean, what would you say to maybe a single mother that's working here in Jacksonville supporting a couple of kids who's having tax dollars to go to, say, Everbank or something? Is that a good deal?
Absolutely not. And to be perfectly honest with you, it almost doesn't make sense from a business perspective to get caught up in one of those deals, because you know they don't last forever. And eventually you'll have to go back to paying your regular tax rate, and now you're stuck in a location where you can't get your product to market, just as Joe was saying. But at the same time, the job is where it's at. So that mother can probably drive down to the south side and go to work there, and the city benefits from that. The company benefits from being in the proper position. It's still in the city still collects the tax revenues. That money could be better spent improving the infrastructure, making downtown more attractive to businesses that have special needs, rather than just trying to draw the business in to a position where they can't actually effectively do business.
Right. I frankly don't know how any of these government officials can look at, say, a business owner that's already in an area who's maybe running a company that's in the same line of work as one of these companies are planning on handing an incentive check to. I just don't know how they can say, this town is companies think about relocating here to Jackson, we're going to give them all this money. We know they're going to be competitors, and we're going to take your tax dollars to do it. So absolutely incredible. Believe it or not, guys, we're at the end of the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Joe Andrews, thank you. Concerned Taxpayers, all the work that you guys have been doing is great stuff. Richard, we really appreciate you being on the show. We look forward to having you on future shows. Congratulations on your new role as the regional representative. We look forward to hearing great things, and so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for all of you out there, as always, we thank you so much for tuning into the Libertarian Perspective. Again, Wednesdays at 7 o'clock here at Comcast. Look for us at other times as well. We'll see you next month for another installment of the Libertarian Perspective.